Hello, my friends. Welcome back. Let's take a look at something here. We have a bit of an old world architectural homage that has been right here under people's noses for decades. And although it is not a hidden secret, I certainly don't think anybody's really been paying attention. I looked at this thing for years and never connected any dots at all. But once I realized it, I immediately correlated that this is definitely a replica, if you will, of one of these old world buildings. Specifically World's Fair type of buildings and architecture. So once I realized that there was a connection, it was just super clear. And sure enough, it is definitely that. An homage to the Great Exhibition of 1851. And it is located in Dallas, Texas. So we're going to take a look at that. But first, let's do a quick recap for anybody that is not familiar. If you have not been through this, we'll take a quick run through. There's a pretty good layout of this in my video series in the previous playlist, Hidden History, Timeline Deception. We'll give you a full breakdown, but we'll do a quick recap here. We're talking Old World. We're talking about, in this instance especially, Tartaria and the ancient civilization of Tartaria that has been scrubbed, essentially, from the majority of history. Documented by CIA documents and plenty of other sources throughout the known world, actually. So we'll do a quick recap of this. Tartaria was Wikipedia will show you Tartaria, and it will show you a very small area of what would be Russia, and that it was contained to basically that area. And there's a history there that it's a very small excerpt. As you can see, the CIA document here, we'll cover that a little further on in the recaps after this. But that the history provided of Tartaria is absolutely not true, and it's incredibly limited and has been falsified, rewritten, and basically removed from the majority of the history books from most of the world. Especially at this point, especially in the United States. We were never taught any of this in school. Again, more detail on that if you go back and watch that series. We're just going to do a little bit more here. So these are some old maps showing Tartaria, Grand Tartary, and the civilization essentially was responsible for building lots and lots and lots of really amazing architecture and amazing things that covered the whole span of the earth. All over the world, similar architecture, amazingly intricate. I mean, detail levels and precision levels that we can't match today still. So the evidence of these, existing structures and them being all over the world, not matching up with any regional significance that we would think of. And that really the history of a lot of these buildings is that they were in fact just repurposed. A lot of them were destroyed, and appears to be intentionally destroyed at some point in the last 150 years. Most of it between around 1850 and 1904, 1912, somewhere in that range. But almost every major city in the United States had a Great Fire of some kind like this, and there were structures that were destroyed that looked completely different than stuff that we're making today. And these are some examples. These are in the video, the previous video as well. So these are some of the fires that have occurred in some of the major cities. These are just a small handful. You can research and find a lot more of these, and you can see what structures and buildings looked like in these places before these fires. And again, these fires took place in almost every major city in the entire country and throughout the world at some point, really between around 1850 and 1912 or so. These fires destroyed the majority of buildings that looked like this. But these are very old. And when you compare what we're building today in contrast to what used to be in these places, it looks like, we're going backwards. So the history of these places is that a lot of these that are still existing that do look like this, they're actually much older than we've been told, and the narrative behind them is not accurate, and we did not build them. We just essentially moved into them. And that the disappearing act of this civilization is to hide the real history behind all of these buildings and architectures and history of all of our different nations. And essentially these buildings and their remnants are a large piece of the evidence that doesn't match up with the narrative we've been given. So you take a look at that and kind of get a pretty good idea of where that goes from there. So from that recap, we'll give a little bit there so you understand the frame of reference for the architecture of these buildings that we're about to look at and the significance of them. So you understand that. So what we're looking at here is the architecture of the building of the Great Exhibition of 1851, which is also known as the Crystal Palace Exhibition, as you can see here. So this was a World's Fair type event that took place in 1851 in Hyde Park, London. So the narrative of these places is that each of these world fairs, that these grand buildings, amazing architecture, were created and built in a very short amount of time. We're talking even at sometimes in a matter of weeks to months, that these things were supposedly constructed only with the intention of housing a World's Fair event, only to be torn down after the conclusion. And that is the given narrative in the history of these World's Fair events. That's what the historical narrative will tell us. And I mean, that is just considering what these buildings look like and the magnificence of the architecture. It's just a ludicrous idea that you would build that for a fair and then after destroy it. So that idea doesn't stand up at all. But this is what we're looking at in this particular instance. And you can go back and look through all of these. There's some great channels that have done amazing correlations and research, finding all sorts of old photos from all over the world showing remnants of these structures and narratives that don't support what we're looking at all. Old World on YouTube with John Levi. There's another channel that's done some really good work called Mind Unveiled. Their Tatarian research is also really solid, and I've also linked those in that prior video as well. But there you can get some very deep level knowledge and see a lot of stuff there. So in this particular, like I said, we're looking at the Crystal Palace exhibition, which is the structure that we see here. So on the Crystal Palace exhibition, the building is pretty amazing. And if you're looking here, Wikipedia will redirect us and show us some more photos. And we're actually going to go back and look through those. I've got some more saved later, but this just kind of gives you an idea. And that this place, the size of this place, was almost 1 million square feet. This is a massive, massive building. And so this just kind of gives you a little bit of the overview of where it was done and some of the ideas, the conception of it. So, kind of looking at some of the pictures here, artist renderings, and this place was very renowned. At some point, though, it was also destroyed in a fire. So, the construction of it took place around 1850, we're told. And you can go through more of these details if you want to. It's a great feat of construction. Okay, this is very impressive stuff. So it opened May 1st of 1851 for the Great Exhibition at the Crystal Palace. There were even coins made to show, kind of the significance of this event. And relocation, that it was actually relocated and had to be reconstructed. And then after that, it eventually burned in a fire. So, always a fire wherever we're finding these World's Fair and ancient structures that don't fit the history. They seem to get destroyed or severely damaged to the point where we really don't know much about it at all. So, when you see this, and we're also aware, now we'll look at some of the actual, and we're aware that there's a lot of nonsense involved in what we've been told about our history and where these places were and what functions they serve just don't match up. So, researching orphan trains, any of those things will take you further into that research so you can understand the greater context of this, the whole idea behind this. But, so we're looking at the Crystal Palace construction and the homage to it that's here in Texas. And it's actually been here for quite a while at this point. So, we'll show you first a little bit of background again on the Tartaria and some of the actual evidence. So this is an actual excerpt from the declassified document from the CIA that's describing the history of Tartaria, and I've got more in the next segment here so you can see more. So the main portion of this is describing that during the USSR, so in that time period, the Central Committee of the Communist Party in Moscow issued a directive ordering the party's Tartar Provincial Committee to proceed to a scientific revision of the history of Tartaria, to liquidate serious shortcomings and mistakes of nationalistic character committed by individual writers and historians in dealing with Tartar history. In other words, Tartar history was to be rewritten. Let us be frank, was to be falsified in order to eliminate references to Great Russian aggressions and to hide the facts of the real course of the Tartar-Russian relations. And this was no isolated case. In every Muslim area within the USSR, historians on orders of the Communist Party have rewritten history to distort the facts, so that the Russians appear always in a good light. Needless to say, histories which present the facts truthfully have been withdrawn and destroyed, so that the present and future generations of Muslims are forever denied the chance of learning the true facts of their nation's past. And this is from a 1998 CIA document, and you can find that. Just search the web for it, little excerpts of that, and you'll find the full document. So, and again, that's from the CIA.gov library down here at the bottom. So, this is definitely not just some conspiracy where people were trying to connect dots. There is absolute established history of this civilization, and that it spanned far beyond anything that would pertain to USSR or Muslim territories as we know them. Now, with that being said, we also know that the United States loves to paint other countries in a certain light. So, we'll take that with a grain of salt, but this is very well established information at this point. So, again, some of the maps that we've got here, and you can see the names. It's all over. It's on rivers. It's on, there's small, petite Tartary, small Tartary. They're all over. And this has been scrubbed from history. So the significance of buildings and structures like that, spanning across the world and all being very similar in the style and function and how they were designed, the mathematics, and the fact that it's consistent, says that there was some civilization that was unified in some regard that was spanning across most of the world. And this and these maps definitely make it look a lot more like the case. So when we're looking through this stuff and we can find kind of homages to it here in the United States regarding something that was, possibly here for a much longer time than we were told, and served maybe a greater function in older times, and we kind of get like an homage to it here in modern times with no real history of why they're showing it to us. So then, of course, these are some of the, buildings that we were looking at, and the Great Exhibition, and how amazing this stuff is. I mean, this is pretty impressive, even today. And now, we have in Dallas, Texas, and this has been here since the 80s. And in the Wikipedia article, it'll definitely tell you that that was the basis for the construction of this, was from the Crystal Palace. But outside of that, I've been around the Dallas area for a very long time, and everybody's seen this building driving near downtown on I-35. It's been there a long time. People have known it's, what type of, function it has in our modern day, but nobody's ever really known anything else about it. I've never known anybody that knew that this was actually supposed to be an homage to the Crystal Palace in the World's Fair of 1851 in London. And when you think about where the technical legal terminologies fall into London, and that it is a corporation on paper, being separate from the monarchy and other things, and as the Vatican is also separate in its own entity, and as the United States, legally on paper is a corporation, and legally as a subsidiary of London and the London Corporation. So, World's Fair of London in 1851, Crystal Palace. And this is in Dallas, Texas, which is one of the major finance and money capitals in our country. And right next door to this building, and which has also been there for decades, this is sitting right next to the World Trade Center locations in Dallas, Texas. And this is what is considered the Market Center District. So, I don't think it's a coincidence that the building in Dallas, Texas, that is an homage to that, when you know the other connections, it seems to stand out a little differently. And there's no question what that was intended to look like. Like I said, they haven't hid that. That part's been apparent, but you have to look for it. So, when we come here, this is your current Equinix Infomart. So you see here, this was originally constructed as part of the Trammell Crow Dallas Market Center in 1985. So 1985. So it served as a kind of a trade show for a lot of data and tech stuff, which actually was a very similar function to the Crystal Palace facility. For many, many years, they used it as a similar function for trade show. And that's what this place ended up being for years and years. After several years as a permanent trade show, it was sold in the late 90s and again in the early 2000s. So these are some of the early companies that participated around that building and its function. And when you see again, like I said, what's next door to it, and some of the other things that it's associated with, this place has been pretty important for a long time, and it's a data center. So this is a massive data center. And as you can see here, designed and modeled after the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park. So, definitely a very interesting history of companies and things, but its location and the kind of services that it's provided and what it served as its functions and the homage that it's playing to is very interesting. And I think as people are doing more research and getting closer into finding that this is not just random conspiracy ideas, that these are well-established dots that can be paralleled, and you can look right at them and you can find all kinds of interesting information. But this is just more evidence of the hidden history and them showing us in plain sight things of importance from the past that have connections to the real history that has surrounded us. So I just wanted to share that with you today and give you a little more that you can wrap your head around and continue researching Tartaria and hidden history and distorted timelines. And again, Old World with John Levi on YouTube is an outstanding channel. And another that will show you some great evidence of hidden history and timeline deception is Old World Florida. So both of theirs I would highly recommend, and you will keep yourself very busy. Peace and love, my friends.